curiosity, were you destined to be a journalist?
Me?
Yeah.
No. I had gone to school to be an English teacher, and I loved school. So I didn't really want to work. So I came home to do some postgraduate work, master's work at Fredonia, and the Post-Journal advertised for a clerk position that you started at 6 in the morning, and it was a 40-hour week, but 6 days a week. So I had all afternoon and evenings, so I could do both. And this was in like 72, I think. So remember when Vietnam let the POWs home? There was a POW from Kane who was coming home, and the editor at the time, Frank Fee, didn't have anybody else to send but me. I was rolling ticker tape and doing obits and stuff. So he sent me down to interview this guy, and the one phrase that I remember writing, and this is what caught his attention, was that I wrote into the story that talking with this guy, it was like there was a curtain between us, a nightmare curtain, because I couldn't really grasp what he had gone through. I couldn't feel it, because I had no idea. And the news editor wanted to cut that out because that's not a journalistic observation to put in there, but Frank knew what I was talking about because he'd been over there. Anyway, that's when I got started. He realized I could write, so I started covering, I think, town and village governments.
Really?
And within 10 years, I was editor. Yeah. I really found my calling, accidentally.
Are you native?
Yeah, I grew up in Hartfield.
Hartfield? Tell me a little bit about your mom and dad.
My dad, both of them grew up here in Westfield.
Okay.
Dad's parents were actually from Minnesota, but his dad sold bred and sold horses, and apparently sold some horses to a farmer here, and so brought them here, and loved it here. Meanwhile, as I understand it, my grandmother wasn't getting along with the other wives of the brothers, so they decided to get out of Minnesota and they moved here. And he became a grape farmer, worked at Welch's. My mother's family, her dad was third generation commercial fisherman in Barcelona. So she grew up in Barcelona.
Hence your more than casual interest in the fisheries of...
Exactly. And I remember my great-grandfather, who was the second generation fisherman. It was his dad who started the business. So yeah, it's all in the family.
Without stealing any thunder, because I know you're going to shortly be giving a speech at Lawson, but how did it really work? When you talk about the business, the fishery business, did he own a boat and then go out and catch and bring it?
As I understand it, I've kind of put this together with things that I've read and heard. His father actually had a tavern down on what became Route 5, and was on the side selling fish oil. And he realized if he caught the fish himself and rendered them, he could make more money. So that's how he started in the fishing, and that would have been 1845, 1850. Well, the railroad came through, and there were already commercial fishing there. The railroad came through in 1852, which opened up the New York City market to the fishermen. And the number of families involved in fishing out of Barcelona just exploded, just grew. So they started, that's how the business started. They originally were fishing out of, I can't imagine this, 25-foot sailboats. And they were using gill nets at the time, which meant that from this 25-foot sailboat, they were pulling nets up by hand full of fish. Remarkable.
When you say they were going out of Barcelona, we see now the breakwater and the Daniel Reed area. Was that all there, that concept? No?
No, when at some point, in fact, Michelle Henry has all the maps that show this. The harbor was in a couple of different places with breakwalls built out of sorts. When they finally ended up in what is the harbor today, there was a natural sandbar there that helped protect the harbor, but there were times when they couldn't fish out of there, and so they would go fish out of the Dunkirk Harbor, which was I think a more protected harbor. But they started fishing with using gasoline engines right around 1900. It's kind of interesting to read because they didn't trust the engines. They sailed out, they were under sail going out, and it was only when they were collecting their nets that they were using their gas engines.
Okay.
Didn't take them long to realize they could go out further, fish quicker using gas engines.
Yeah.
So they converted their sailboats to gas.
Have you ever been out on a fishing boat?
No.
Was that ever a curiosity for you?
I was pretty little when my grandfather quit fishing. It's when the United States outlawed gill nets. They still fish with them in Canada.
Okay.
In fact, fishing on the Great Lakes in Canada is a huge industry, and it's virtually not at all here.
What type of fish was the catch?
The money fish, back when they were selling it to the hotels and restaurants in New York City, were the bigger fish, the whitefish. But they would also, well, they could, depending on what kind of net they used, they could avoid catching the little fish. So they went after the whitefish. They would have had not, they weren't, I don't think they were going after sturgeon. They were too big and they wrecked the nets.
Walleye?
Walleye, I don't believe there were a lot of walleye in the lake at that time.
That seems to be today.
Yeah, I can't think of the name of the other fish that was so popular, and then it pretty much died off in the lake. Anyway, the fishing, when they outlawed gill nets, the fishing industry on the lake, on the New York side of the lake, really dropped off.
Why did they eliminate? What was the gill fish net that would be damning?
I think it probably was cruel.
Okay.
The net floated at the bottom of the lake, and it had whatever size fish they wanted. They chose nets that would have a bigger lace, and the fish would get caught in it because they couldn't get back, they couldn't get through it, and they couldn't back out because it would catch their gills. And they might be caught in that net overnight or a day or two. It was so cold at the bottom of the lake, I've been told, that it preserved the fish even if they died in the net. So the Canadians are, and it's interesting that the Canadians are still fishing that way.
Yeah.
We're not here.
So today, I go down to the Barcelona Smokehouse and get fresh fish. Where do they get their fish? Do they ship it in?
No, they have one of the, I think only 2 licenses left at Barcelona. They fish, but they fish just for perch. Okay. So they're not using gill nets. I don't know what the kind of nets they're using, but they're more of a gathering kind of net. I think in all of Lake Erie that borders on New York, there are 4 fishing licenses, I've read.
So one of them's here. And so where do they go in and out of? I mean,
Barcelona. Their boat is there.
is it? Okay.
The iconic Lake Erie fishing, or Great Lake fishing boat, you've seen them. They're the ones that have the back that is open, and then there's a door up in front where they bring the nets up. That was for the gill nets. The guys that are fishing out of there now use a boat that has just an enclosed front, but the whole back is open, because I think just because of the kind of netting they're using.
And it'll come into the harbor? I mean,
They're there, yeah.
Wow.
If you went down, there is down there right now, and it's actually been there a couple of years, a Great Lakes commercial fishing boat, the way you think of it, the 48-foot steel hull.
Yeah.
But the other boat that they fish from is down there. And you can recognize it because the whole back of it's open.
I'll have to go down there. The
Yeah.
road shows. Well, this is great. So you went to the local schools here, Westfield?
Mm-hmm. Went to Mayville.
Mayville?
Great class of '66, yeah.
I was asked to ask you about one of your early coverage events, and I won't mention his name, Jason Sample, so he told me not to mention his name, but that you covered Evans fire? Was it with the roller skating fire? Did you cover that one of your first of it?
And at that time I was living in Celeron.
Oh, really?
So I realized I realized it was going on, so I went out of my house, and the first thing I saw was kids who were on skates still coming up, and some of them, it looked to me like they had been burned. Mm. It was a Halloween party, and they were in costume. I thought they'd been burned, but yeah, the roof caved. It was a spectacular fire.
So did you have cameras? Did you have the ability to do that? Take a picture?
I didn't have, at that time we were using the, what did they call them? The big cameras. Can't think what they call them, but you know what I mean.
The box.
Yeah, the big ones.
Yeah.
But I had a little Kodak camera that I was using, yeah. Yeah, and Dick Hallberg was there pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So then you found yourself ultimately in the rising up the ranks to a point of being the editor.
Yeah, it was Don Meyer. You remember Don? At the time, I went through all the steps of being a reporter. I covered town and village government and schools. Eventually, I covered county government and politics. I was the first woman to cover politics. And then went on to the desk. I became the city editor, so I was directing the reporters. And when Earl Champlin who was our publisher, was promoted to Wheeling, and Don Meyer was our editor, was becoming publisher, he wanted me to be his editor. And as he tells it, the owner of the paper, Ogden Nutting, wasn't sure how the community would react to having a woman editor. But he knew me. I had spent time with him sailing. Anyway, he knew me, and Don insisted. And it wasn't, I felt when I was editor, it was a non-issue. I didn't feel any reluctance or discrimination. It may have been there, but I was overlooking it. I didn't see it. The only person who had a problem with it was our ad director, and Ron Schultz. And I knew I won him over by I didn't fight with him. Rather, I made friends with him. Mm-hmm. I knew I had won him over when I came into the office one day and opened my office door and all the furniture was gone. It was Ron playing a prank. So I knew I had made it.
Curious, you mentioned that you were the first female who covered politics, which was an all-man's world. So you walk into maybe a caucus or some public event, and you're the only, stand out like a sore thumb. Did you get a reaction there? I imagine if there was ever going to be a reaction, it would be those cigar-smoking guys.
To tell you the truth, the reaction was always to underestimate me. Mm-hmm. And I used that to my advantage.
Yeah.
Didn't last long, but I was always treated well. I was at meetings where I was the only woman in the room. But as I said, if I was not being treated well, I didn't recognize it.
Yeah.
I wasn't looking for it, I guess. But it was an advantage.
Yeah.
The cute little thing. I mean, what do I know?
Well, that's great. Well, you established such a reputation, and segueing a little bit into my world, certainly we started the Robert Jackson Center basically in December of 2000 with Carl and Betty and Gabby and stuff. But it was shortly thereafter we met. Talked about this center. And I'm just going to blow you up with a glory gun here for a second, but I felt very strongly talking with you that you would give me critical, you would listen, and critical comment about maybe what we were having ideas, because I'd love to use you as a, I don't know if I ever told you this, but as a muse, and just simply say, hey, guess what I'm thinking of, or guess what's going to happen, or something, and you'd get kind of the scoop and never take advantage of the scoop. And I appreciated that immensely on every front. So I want to just publicly, for the camera, tell you that. Because I've always told people that. I may have never told you that. So that happened, all the way through our relationship. But it found flavor our first events, and which was good, was May 1st. We incorporated in March of 2001, and we bought the building in April of 2001. I knew we needed to do something to have a splash. All right, May 1st, Law Day, and I had met the only biographer, Eugene Gerhardt.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I remember that.
New York. But you put together this document, and it's dated. Words from his mighty pen, the Post-Journal, Monday, April 30th, 2001. And I'm not even sure I knew you were doing this, but it popped the day before our event. And it's, Robert H. Jackson lived an incredible life, the wit and wisdom of Robert H. Jackson. And R. Jackson looks at the concept of liberty under law. You reprinted one of his articles. You got various people to advertise. You were thinking already how to do this. And humble beginnings as the county self, but that's you.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that.
Foresight to do this. And this, I've said this recently at a big dog and pony show. I pulled this out and showed this, and I said, this was Cris Herbst. Cris Herbst. The date, time said the day before it sort of popped in the paper, May 1st, Law Day, and you did that. I don't know what,
I know why. I know what motivated me to do that. I, of course, knew who Jackson was, but I didn't know much about him. So I went down to Fenton to see what they had. Did you ever go down there and see their collection? It was in a box.
I did not. No.
Well, it was a box. They had a loose teacup in it, and mostly clippings and a few things that belonged to him. And as I'm looking through the box, I realized, holy cow, this guy, of course he was a Supreme Court justice, but he was more than that, as you know. And I realized that if I didn't know a lot about him, most people probably casually didn't know a lot about him. And that's why I thought we needed to do something so people understood what you were about, what you were doing, and his importance. And I ended up doing these the first few anyway, and then I think you guys took it over, but because, as you know, his
What he said, just what she said was, he said, Robert H. Jackson, words from his mighty pen, which I have other iterations of, but she just kept pounding them out.
Because his, as you know, his writing was so extraordinary, and his ability to make the law so clear, and his reasoning, and he's so approachable by anybody who can read, that I thought it was important to share some of his, well, as you know, some of his most quoted things. And that piece that we put out was part of the paper, the original piece, and that's why it had advertising. It had to pay for itself. This piece, when by then I had talked to you about this, I called Chuck D'Angelo and said, Chuck, I don't remember what it cost, but I said, we're publishing this piece. I have to cover, the Post-Journal will do it, but I have to cover the cost. He took care of it. Called Lamancuso, and the two of them pay for it.
Yeah. She's got Jacksonisms. She's got What is Law, Liberty Under Law, which are articles written by Jackson. So the whole booklet are quotes from cases, addresses by Jackson, and actually the Post-Journal editorial when Jackson died, which was such an incredible piece. We didn't have anything. We had no publications at the Jackson Center because we didn't have an autograph, we had nothing.
Yeah.
So, I hate to say it, like a historical center, we had to go out and tromp around all over the place to get anything, but you provided the basis, you, Cris Herbst, and not a amalgam of Post-Journal. And then you got Stan Weeks, Weeks articles, and another one, which was words from his mighty pen. Again, this time you got Rotary to kick in. And then there's another one, which you did, Adam Bratton and myself signed. John Barrett was provided information. And then Robert Jackson's many claims to fame, but probably foremost is his Nuremberg days.
Right.
And you and I talked about what if we looked at seeing how the local newspaper treated Jackson during the Nuremberg trial. And so 1945, 1946, another Cris Herbst special. Robert H. Jackson at Nuremberg through the pages of his hometown news. And essentially, the headlines of the Jamestown Post-Journal, 45 and 46.
The hometown boy.
Hometown boy. How did the hometown paper treat? Because there's no other place in the world which you could find that than the local microphone. But that wouldn't have happened. Again, I'm blowing you up, Cris, but without your willingness to do that.
You know, it was, I was so lucky to be in the position I was in, being editor of the paper, and being able to decide what we were going to cover and how we were going to cover it. And that day when I went through Jackson's box at the Fenton, I became a big fan of his. His writing and his reasoning on his decisions were so, the writing was eloquent and the decisions were so common sense. I became his fan. So I was as interested in promoting the center and Jackson as you were, in a way. And I could use, the paper to do it. That was a privileged position to be in. The day that Rehnquist came to town, I remember what Margaret Look, who had been our news editor, said she was so, when Jackson died, the entire court came. She was so upset that the schools weren't let out for the kids to go see the court, when schools had been let out when Lucille Ball came back to town. I remember her telling me that, but when Rehnquist came to town, there were school kids there. And I knew from the crowds that we in Jamestown got it. We understood. We knew who this man was. I don't know that people realized that he had practiced law for 20 years in Jamestown. Chuck D'Angelo was delighted when I was able to point out to him that Jackson's one of his first cases was representing a union.
He told me that. See, they've always been supporters because of that. On Rehnquist, I remember how excited I was to finally get confirmation that he was going to come. And I told you were the first to know. And you were good at keeping that under wraps, but you prepared for him. I mean, you were prepared, Greg. There'll be a time certain, but you'll be the first to blast it. But not before we're ready.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot going on. Just that, the preparation, we had a book like this of all we had to do. But what I really remember is the day after Rehnquist came, the Jamestown Post-Journal ran 8 full pages of coverage. Every angle possible. I mean, you must have had every staffer there.
We did. And they all had an assignment. They all had a particular part of the visit that they were supposed to cover.
I mean, 8 pages, Chris.
Yeah.
Beyond, I don't know if that ever happened anytime, anywhere, but
it was a big deal. Yeah. It was a big deal. And I have a picture of Joe Gerasi and I that day. And I know it's from that day because we had our tags on that we wore. Yeah. Yeah, it was a remarkable day. And for my staff, we tended to hire young kids out of school. It was an opportunity for them. I'm sure they still all remember doing it, and we were well prepared to we knew we were going to do that big section on them.
You did. It was, I mean, to this day, that's one of the real bonus points. Of course, we had Roberts thereafter, which was equally covered, but never anything quite like that first 8-page Post-Journal.
You know, I remember standing there that day, and it was a rainy day, right? And hearing him speak. I may have written about this, I can't remember, but it was so strange hearing the voice that I hear on the radio, and there he was in person. Yeah, it was quite a day. You know, you talked about being able to talk with me, and I wasn't running out publishing things right away. That was one of the nice things about being that I was editor, is that you can tell and a good editor can tell the difference between something that the public needs to know immediately. And that happened one time when, I don't remember the name of the company in town, but they were selling children's pajamas that were made of flammable material. And they wanted us to hold the story. Of course we're not going to hold the story. People need to know immediately. But the plans that you were making, the plans I knew would be better if we waited until the time was right. And it didn't harm the public not to tell them right away.
Yeah, and you did that, whether it was Brown versus Board of Education, bringing in Linda Brown, Cummins Engine, the Barnett sisters, the law professors, the Nuremberg trials, and the other thing, you assigned reporters. I don't know if you ever told them that, but to kind of stay with us. Steve Holden comes to mind.
I signed him on purpose.
Yeah.
Because he knew, I don't know how to put it, he had this sort of intellect that enabled him to grasp the greatness of Jackson. He understood it. And I thought was able to cover it much better because of that.
Yeah. And he did, and I made a conscious effort, because I was doing things like, or you and I are doing here, but I always included him.
Yeah.
I mean, I always put him right there. You can ask questions just like anybody else. This is your moment to do that. So many of the early interviews, it was Steve and then whoever his successors were. But I wanted to make sure that, I didn't do that with every news outlet.
I didn't know you were doing that, but it sure helped him with his coverage.
Yeah, and so Steve, when we had the Nuremberg prosecutors the first year, every day he had the coverage. And then he'd have a news article, which was part of the interview. So the event, coverage, Whitney Harris, Bernie Meltzer. And so he had two pieces, and essentially every day, and we loved it, of course, we had great coverage. And capturing it on print is so much more eternal, let's say, but it's there. I had a chance now to go back. Maybe it's part of aging, part of just reflecting on 25 years, but kind of look at the files and say, gee, wow, did we have coverage? And that's because of you.
Well, you're welcome, but it came from my notion that, as a society or as a community, we were better knowing about Jackson and knowing of him, and maybe learning from him. I just thought the Jackson Center was extremely important to our community. One of the most important, it still is, one of the most important elements of our community. And gosh, I wasn't in a position to make sure it got good coverage. So.
Well, you also, as part of what we were doing, you encouraged an educational component. Do you want to talk a little bit about what inspired that?
I thought it was, at some point it occurred to me, I think it's when I was reading through some of his stuff, some of his writing, that it's so important for us to understand the nuances, the difference between what's legal and what's right. What does the law say and what's fair? They're not always the same thing. And Jackson was so eloquent and spot on in pointing those things out. And I thought that the Jackson Center would be a wonderful vehicle for having kids, and I was imagining grade school kids talking about these things, coming to understand it in a way that would make them, I don't know if I would say better citizens, but I think probably that's what I had in mind. More informed citizens as they're adults, if they understood the role of the law. And it's not always fair. It doesn't always feel fair. That's where that came up with. And I've been trying to remember the name of the teacher that I called first, and I can't remember him. I know what he looked like, but
John Sember.
Yes, yeah. When I called him, and because you said, when I explained this to you, you said, well, go do that. I called him.
That's by the way, people will smile when you just say, Greg, that's how you work. You get pumped up.
Every time I would see Greg coming, I would think, oh, geez, what am I going to get into now? Yes, it was John. He put together a group of teachers, and I think I went to 2 of their meetings and realized they were off and running with it. I didn't need to stay with it. But I think that Jackson, I think that he is still there, and we still need to know about him. Well, maybe even more than ever, to understand his reasoning and see where he's coming from, and to be able to verbalize what we feel about society and the laws that, the only reason laws work is because we agree that we'll follow them.
Yeah.
And Jackson was really good at explaining why. Yeah.
As a result of that sort of your suggestion, sometimes you never know how this all works out, but you're right. We created a committee. John December sort of drove it. John was also good friends with Riley Kidder, and that was a connect. And Anita Sanctuary got involved. Next thing you know, we had young readers events, an essay contest that went with the young readers, and some of that still goes on today. But the seed was right here, sitting in the chair.
Well, I'm honored to have been there with it. It was exciting. It was exciting to think about the possibilities of that center at the beginning. And of course, you were like 50 miles ahead of all of us with it. But I was even really moved by Betty and Carl willing to fund it. They also caught the bug of what a tremendous opportunity this was for our community. They understood. And wasn't it remarkable that we had those two people there at the right time?
But now time has lapsed, you can't really replicate that.
It was a moment when, you're right, I hadn't thought about it that way, but there were people in the community then who were great thinkers. I think of some of them, Bill Parment, great thinkers and committed, and they could see the need in the future. I think that we all were seeing a future that was more than a dream. It was real to all of us, although nothing existed yet except that crummy building.
Well, that was a building was no telling what was going to happen to this big, huge 19,000 square foot, and that too was serendipitous, and I would not have even known it was available but for Stan Weeks. But it was all of that boom, 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 boom.
They came together.
It came together, and then I met with Carl, Betty, and Brad was in the audience watching this, and that's a whole other story.
But that's another serendipitous thing that he was available.
So you were here at the Chautauqua County Historical Society, and you have been really actively involved. Was history part of your DNA?
Yeah, and it was when I retired that I had time, and they as my retirement was announced, I got a call right away and was invited onto the board here. And actually, I was invited onto other boards too. They must wait for people to retire to have time to do it, but. My roots are in Westfield, or Barcelona, really. We lived in Barcelona until I was 4 or 5, and then moved. But I love history, and I knew from working at the paper that a lot of historical things had happened here in Chautauqua County. Part of it's geography. Everybody who's going west from New England had to come through here one way or another, or had to sail by. And the County Historical Society existed well before any other historical societies did. So we have really some important collections here. The Albion Torget collection is here. We get people from all over, actually all over the world, but certainly all over the country coming here to research it. We've had some law firms from Buffalo bring their interns down here. Yeah, well, you know, we set them up out. Sure. We put the important papers in sleeves so that they can see the originals and handle them. But history, I think it helps inform, this sounds like a cliche, but it does help inform us where we've been, who we are, how did we get here, who got here. And if you look at the history of the county, there's been a lot of innovators have come out of here. Didn't end up doing their renovations here necessarily, But just as an example, the guy who was the impetus for having the federal government establish Labor Day grew up in Brockton. The first Grange was here. Roger Tory Peterson, Jackson, Lucille Ball. I mean, it just. I was president of the Historical Society. In fact, I just stepped down when Jason agreed to take over. I felt like I really put it in good hands, and I've enjoyed it because this is a wonderful building and it's historic. But I'm not as interested in objects as I am documents, as you can imagine. And I have time now to just delve into them and out of curiosity go read someone's whatever we have on them. In fact, the timelines that's coming out probably in a week or so, I had come across an address that Ernie Leet had given to the Historical Society talking about pollution in Chautauqua Lake. And he was very eloquent about it and very direct. And angry or upset that local political leaders weren't doing anything about it. But that was a gem, to find. Anyway, I found a home, I guess, after I retired. I love retirement, by the way.
Well, one of the things I was glad we were able to do at the Jackson Center, and it was just a small thing, was when you did retire, we did have an event at the center.
Yes, you did.
And I was glad that we were able to do that. And I know the Chautauqua Region Community Foundation, when they honored you in the Hamilton Award, did it there. Unfortunately, it was COVID.
But you know what, Greg, I'm basically an introvert. So to me, the best kind of party is the one I don't have to go to. So it worked out well. We did it at the Jackson Center, and there was no party I had to go to. But what an honor! That was an honor.
Well.
And I'm still involved in Jamestown. I'm still on the UPMC Hospital Board. Although I think seems like it's time to get off. I've been on a long time, but I've enjoyed being in a position to. Certainly, the local board doesn't direct the hospital, but rather, I think one of the reasons that I was invited onto that board is that it was kind of our job to make sure that they were living up to the contract, and they have and more. That was a really lucky thing that happened.